The sound reached her before the man did. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, rolling across the empty Wyoming road like a warning wrapped in promise. Out here, nothing arrived without meaning, and Avaline Somerville felt it in her bones before she ever saw him. The first true sign that Avaline Somerville's life was about to tilt. Off its careful balance came with those hoofbeats traveling over the long, vacant stretch of road leading to her cabin. Bitter Creek lay 2 miles behind her, little more than a forgotten name on a map, a place people passed through only when they had no better choice. Out here, the wind carried everything: sound, dust, secrets, regret, and it delivered this sound straight to her chest. The rhythm was unhurried, confident, drawing closer with no sign of doubt, and it made her heart twist painfully because she knew she wasn't ready. She had changed her dress twice already, smoothing the fabric as if it could calm her nerves, had tied and untied her hair until her fingers ached, had practiced polite greetings, under her breath only to lose every word the moment her hands began to shake. The prairie sun pressed down hard, bleaching the land to pale gold, and the yard stretched open in every direction. Nothing but stubborn grass and dry soil daring anything to grow. The cabin behind her creaked and popped in the heat, old wood complaining as it always did. Chickens pecked lazily at the dirt, unbothered by the tension knotting her spine. Everything felt too still, too open, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then the man crested the rise. He rode a dusty bay horse, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, sunburned, sitting easy like someone who belonged there, like a man who had spent more of his life moving than standing still. When he reached the porch, he swung down in one smooth, practiced motion, boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud that made her pulse jump. He tipped his hat back, and she saw his eyes, blue, bright, and far too bold for a stranger standing on her land. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his grin slow and easy like he had nowhere else to be. "Name's Crispen Bywater. I hear you sent for a man." Avaline felt her throat tighten until the words scraped on the way out. I didn't exactly. "My cousin." "No need to explain," he said, stepping closer, leaning against the porch post as if he owned the breeze itself. "Your cousin Honora said you needed help around the place. Someone to keep things running, someone to keep you safe, someone to keep you company." His gaze swept the yard, measuring it, then returned to her, sharp and amused all at once. "And I'm all that, ma'am, long as the terms are clear." "Terms?" she echoed, barely louder than the wind. He hooked his thumbs into his belt, still smiling in that way that made her feel seen and unsettled at the same time. "A man like me doesn't move without conditions. Folks hire me for all kinds of work. Chopping wood, fixing fences, talking through lonely evenings." His eyes twinkled, teasing without apology, sometimes riding from the back of the saddle. "If a lady prefers." Her breath caught sharply. "From the what?" His grin widened. "Horseback, ma'am. You've got a wilder mind than you let on for a shy girl." Heat rushed to her, face so fast she thought the sun itself might grow jealous. He laughed then, soft and warm, not mocking, just enough to loosen the knot in her chest. "Don't fret," he said gently. "I don't do anything improper unless a lady asks proper first. I'm here for honest work and decent company, whichever you're needing more." Avaline stared at him, her fingers twisting in her apron. She had expected someone older, rougher, quieter, not a man who carried sunlight on his shoulders and spoke, like trouble and comfort rolled into one. "I hired you for chores," she said quietly. "Just chores." "Fair enough," he replied, touching his hat brim in a half-bow that was almost polite. "Housework, yard work, hauling, fixing, talking, whatever you need. I'll keep my manners while I'm paid to." Despite herself, her lips almost curved, she stepped aside. You may come in." "That's the sweetest yes I've heard all week," he said, following her inside. The cabin shrank with him in it. He filled the doorway, filled the room, bringing dust, warmth, and the smell of leather and sun. Avaline busied herself with supper, though her hands trembled as she laid bread on the table. Crispen noticed. He noticed everything. "Ma'am," he said softly. "You live out here alone." "For 2 years," she murmured. He gave a low whistle. "That's a long time for anyone. Longer still for a woman on the frontier?" "I have a fiancé," she said quickly, the words sounding strange even to her own ears. He's been traveling. His business keeps him away. Crispen lifted an eyebrow. For 2 years? She swallowed. He writes. When was the last letter? Her fingers tightened on the table edge. December. December was 6 months ago, he said quietly. A man who means to marry you doesn't wait 6 months to send a word. The truth stung because she had already whispered it to herself in the dark more nights than she could count. He'll return, she insisted. Maybe, Crispen said, leaning closer, lowering his voice. But whether he does or not, you weren't meant to live scared and quiet out here alone? Her breath shivered. She looked down. I didn't hire you to speak about my engagement. No, ma'am, he said, standing and clearing his plate without being asked. You didn't hire me at all. Your cousin did. But since I'm here, I reckon I'll be useful. He rolled his sleeves up, revealing strong, scarred arms, and began washing dishes at her sink like it was the most natural thing in the world. Avaline stared. Marmaduke Fenwick would never have touched a dish. Why do you do this kind of work? She asked before she could stop herself. Crispen paused only for a breath, then spoke with a candor that surprised her. I've got family back in Ohio, my mama and 9 younger siblings. My father died and everything fell apart. If I'd stayed, they would have starved. He shrugged lightly. So I came west. I send money home. Enough to keep them alive. Enough to buy a future someday. I'm not proud, but I'm not ashamed either. Something tight broke open in her chest. This was no drifter, no scoundrel whispered about in town. This was a man who made hard choices for people he loved. When he finished, he dried his hands and turned to her. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. You've got firewood that needs splitting. She nodded, unable to find her voice. He smiled again, warm and teasing. And ma'am, you make a man forget? This job's meant for decent talk. When he stepped back onto the porch, the silence rushed in behind him, but it didn't feel punishing anymore. For the first time in 2 years, it felt like the beginning of something she didn't yet dare name. Crispen Bywater returned the next day at noon, just as promised. The sun sat high over the prairie, bleaching the grass nearly white. Avaline told herself she wasn't waiting by the window, yet found herself there all the same. When she saw him coming up the road, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hat tipped low, her breath caught before she could stop it. He greeted her with a nod and a grin that felt like warmth after a long winter. Afternoon, ma'am. Ready to put me to work? She handed him the axe before she lost her nerve. You can start with the firewood. He swung easily, splitting logs with clean, confident strikes, each thud echoing through the yard. Avaline tried to focus on her chores, but her gaze kept drifting back to him, steady, patient, sure. He hummed as he worked, told small stories between swings, made the labor seem lighter than it was. You ever think of leaving this place? He asked during a water break. She shook her head. This was my father's land. It's all I have. You've got more than land, he said gently. You've got time. You've got choices. She tried to laugh. I'm waiting for a man. Crispen lowered the dipper, water dripping from the rim. A man who doesn't write. Doesn't give much to wait for. It isn't simple. It never is, he said softly, and went back to work without pushing her further. Day after day he returned. 2 weeks passed like a quiet miracle. He fixed the barn door, mended fences, hauled water, cleared brush. Inside the cabin, he filled the silence with stories, ridiculous ones, wild ones, that made her laugh until she forgot she'd ever been lonely. Got chased out of a cornfield once, he said one afternoon, hammering a loose board on the porch. Husband came home early. Angry fellow didn't appreciate my singing. You sing? Avaline asked, surprised. Lady paid extra for it, he grinned. Should have charged more for the pain I caused myself. She covered her mouth, but he saw the smile anyway. There it is, he said softly. Your real smile? Heat crept into her cheeks. She turned away, but he had already seen the light in her eyes, the way she forgot herself when she laughed. As summer deepened, Crispen shed his shirt during work. Avaline truly tried not to look, but his back moved like carved wood, sun and scars marking every line. When he caught her staring, he only grinned. You look at me like that and folks might think you're taking a liking to the view. She fled inside, mortified, while his laughter followed her. never unkind. And through all of it, he never crossed a line, never took more than she allowed, gentle when she startled, respectful when she pulled back, playful without trapping her. Until the evening he reached over her, shoulder for a plate on the high shelf, and his chest brushed her back. She froze at the warmth of him. He stopped instantly. "Careful, ma'am," he murmured. "When a woman pours coffee for a man like that, folks might think she's filling more than his cup. You're insufferable," she breathed. "I'm honest," he replied quietly. "And if I ever touch you more than this, I'll warn you first so you can step away." She turned before she realized what she was doing and found him closer than she expected, his eyes bright and troubled. "I'm engaged," she whispered. "I know," he said, stepping back. "That's why my hands stay on honest work." That night she didn't sleep. And the next morning, a letter arrived. The letter felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Avaline knew the handwriting the moment she saw it. Precise, slanted, formal to the point of coldness. Marmaduke Fenwick, her fiancé, her promise, her past. The envelope rested in her hands like something fragile and sharp all at once. And for a moment she only stood there in the kitchen, listening to the distant scrape of Crispen's boots on the roof as he finished, patching a loose board. When he noticed her face through the window, he climbed down at once, reading the truth in her expression before she ever spoke. "Good news?" he asked gently, brushing dust from his hands. Her voice barely held together. "He's coming back." Crispen didn't smile, didn't frown. He only nodded once. "When?" 2 months. Something flickered in his eyes, too fast to name, then vanished. "Then you'll have your answer soon enough." Inside, she opened the letter and read it once, then again, then a third time, hoping the words might soften if she stared long enough. They didn't. It wasn't a love letter. It read like a ledger entry, all dates and plans and expectations, a reminder of duty rather than affection. When Crispen stepped quietly into the doorway, she held the paper out with trembling fingers. "He says he'll finalize our engagement." "Finalize," Crispen repeated, the word tasting wrong. "That's a cold thing to say about marrying a woman." "That's how he speaks," she whispered. "Does he ask if you're safe? If you're lonely? If you're well?" She looked back at the letter. There was none of that. "He's busy," she said weakly. Crispen crouched beside her chair, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, a man who loves you doesn't write like this." The truth broke through her defenses, and tears rose before she could stop them. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Light as a promise. You deserve someone who chooses you first," he murmured. "Every time." Her breath shook. The room felt too small, too full. She stood abruptly. "I didn't hire you to speak about my engagement." "Then I won't," he said, rising with her. "But I'll keep coming as long as you need me." And he did. Summer slipped toward fall, the prairie turning gold and russet under cooler skies. Avaline threw herself into harvest work, her hands busy even when her mind wasn't. Crispen stayed steady at her side, sunrise to dusk, until the day a polished black carriage rolled into the yard, shining and out of place against the dust. Marmaduke Fenwick stepped down, refined and controlled, boots gleaming, smile practiced. "Avaline," he said, taking her hand, "my dear, I told you I would return." The world tilted. The air thinned. Then the barn door creaked open, and Crispen stepped out with an armful of firewood. He stopped when he saw the stranger. Marmaduke's gaze swept over him with polite disdain. "You may leave," Marmaduke said curtly. "We have private matters." Crispen didn't move. He looked only at Avaline. "You want me to go, ma'am?" Her voice barely followed her thoughts. "Perhaps." "Yes." He nodded once and stepped away, but not before giving Marmaduke a look that spoke volumes without a word. Inside, Marmaduke talked for nearly an hour about Denver, investments, selling the land, plans he had made without her, a future he expected her to accept. He never once asked how she had lived, how she had waited, how she had survived. When he finally left, she sat shaking, unsure what she wanted anymore. Crispen returned quietly, leaning in the doorway. "You all right?" "I don't know." "What did he say?" "That he wants to marry me." Move me to Denver. Sell this place. Crispen's jaw tightened. And is that what you want? She looked at him. The man who had stayed, who had seen her. I don't want to leave. Then you don't have to. But I promised him. He broke his promise first, Crispen said softly. Before she could answer, the carriage rattled back up the road. Marmaduke returned, anger sharp in every step. He pointed at her like she had wronged him. You, he hissed, have been keeping company with a man like him. Crispen was there in 2 strides. Say that again. Marmaduke sneered. He's a hired companion. Crispen didn't strike him. He didn't shout. He stood tall and calm. I'm a man who stayed, he said. That's more than you ever did. The carriage wheels clattered away in a storm of dust. When it was gone, Avaline whispered the truth she could no longer deny. I want to stop waiting. Crispen searched her face. What does that mean? It means I want to choose someone who chooses me. She met his eyes. Will you stay for good? His breath caught. Ma'am, are you asking? Yes. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. You know what I am. I know your heart. My past will follow me. Let it, she said. It's my life. Hope softened his face like dusk over mountains. You want me? Yes. He laughed then, half disbelief, half joy, and gathered her into his arms. Then I'm the luckiest fool on this frontier. The decision, once spoken aloud, seemed to settle into place as if it had been waiting all along. They did not argue it into being or dress it up with hesitation. They simply let it stand solid and frightening and right. They would marry quickly, quietly, without another season of waiting, without another letter that read like obligation instead of affection. When Honora arrived the next morning, arms crossed and eyes sharp as a hawk's, Avaline braced herself for a storm. But when she told her cousin the truth, Honora only huffed and nodded once. Good, she said. About time you stopped waiting for the wind to blow a man back to you. The church bell in Bitter Creek rang on a Wednesday afternoon. Its sound thin but insistent as it drifted over the dusty street. Half the town showed up, not out of blessing but curiosity. Whispers curled through the pews like smoke. That's the girl who waited 2 years for a man who vanished. That's the one marrying the hired companion. Bold choice, foolish choice. Avaline felt every stare until Crispen reached for her hand. His palm was rough, warm, steady. Just look at me, he murmured. She did. The ceremony took 10 minutes. No choir, no flowers, no finery. She wore a blue dress she had sewn herself, stitches a little uneven at the hem. Crispen wore borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit his shoulders. When the preacher finished, Crispen leaned in and kissed her, slow, certain, unashamed. The preacher coughed. The congregation gasped. Avaline felt something open wide in her chest, a future she could finally see. They rode home in her wagon under a sky already leaning toward evening. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Crispen squeezed her hand. Not for a heartbeat. You? Not for anything. The cabin that had once echoed with silence felt different the moment. They crossed the threshold. Crispen carried her inside, stumbled over the rug, laughed, and set her down gently. Our house now, he said. Our house, she agreed. The first days of marriage were quiet in the way new things are. Careful, hopeful, a little unsure. Crispen stopped traveling for work. He put away the wandering life piece by piece and turned himself to the land. He mended the barn roof, fixed the wagon, organized the tools. He worked beside Avaline without pride or complaint. The teasing softened now, replaced with a steadiness that felt even truer. Winter came early, sharp and unkind, but they faced it together. They stacked firewood high, stored food, patched every draft in the cabin walls. On nights when the wind rattled the shutters, Avaline no longer flinched. She knew who lay beside her. She knew who would rise if danger came. She was no longer alone. By spring, the homestead bloomed like it never had before. The garden doubled in size. A new chicken coop stood painted and proud. Fresh white trim brightened the porch rails. Crispen's laughter filled the yard more often than the wind. They built their life slowly, the way a fence is built, one board, one nail, one choice at a time. One morning, years later, Avaline held a letter from the general store, Marmaduke Fenwick's handwriting unmistakable. She didn't open it. She carried it to the stove, struck a match, and watched it burn. Crispen wrapped an arm around her waist. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Time moved the way it always does, forward and unforgiving. Children came, 3 of them, filling the house with noise and scraped knees and endless questions. Crispen became known across 3 counties for his stories. Folks paid him to tell them, turning scandal into laughter, mistakes into lessons. "That shy woman married me," he'd say, nodding toward Avaline with a grin. "So the joke's on her now." Coins filled the hat. Avaline blushed. They expanded the cabin, planted fruit trees, bought dairy cows. Summer nights brought fireflies and off-key singing. Winter mornings brought bread baking and newspapers read aloud. Crispen stumbling over words until Avaline corrected him, patient and proud. They were never rich, but they were whole. Years later, when their children were grown and the prairie had aged with them, Crispen and Avaline sat on the porch at dusk, hands intertwined, land stretching peaceful before them. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked. He grinned. "Do I like it from the back?" She swatted him with her apron. "You nearly scared me to death. You let me stay. Anyway, I was curious." "You still are." The sky faded. From peach to purple, inside life hummed. "Do you think our story will last?" she asked quietly. He kissed her knuckles. "A love story that starts wrong and ends right always. Lasts." She leaned into him as the wind whispered across the fields. The wind carried itself differently now, soft across the wide fields, gentle as if acknowledging the life. Avaline and Crispen had carved from dust and solitude. Morning came with a slow, deliberate warmth. The sun spreading gold across the Wyoming prairie, brushing every blade of grass and every wooden board of the cabin with light. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke, of possibility of a home finally settled. Avaline woke before the children, letting her gaze linger on the horizon where the sky met the distant hills. She felt the pulse of the land under her feet, the quiet heartbeat of a place she had chosen, nurtured, defended, and loved. Crispen lay beside her, sleeping lightly, the faint rise and fall of his chest steady and reassuring. She watched him a moment, longer before her hand found his, fingers curling naturally into his. No words were needed. The history they shared, the pain, the laughter, the long hours of waiting, the choice of each other, spoke for them both. When he stirred, he found her still watching the morning, her face soft in the sun's glow. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough from sleep but tender. "Morning," she replied, brushing a strand of hair back. "Sleep well?" "I did. Next to you, I always do." He shifted closer, the warmth of him grounding her. They dressed quietly, the rhythm of their life together measured and deliberate. From handling chores to preparing breakfast, the mundane infused with the intimacy of years shared. Outside, the wind moved differently across the yard now, gentler, carrying laughter and life instead of solitude and longing. Crispen chopped firewood while Avaline gathered eggs and tended the garden. Every swing of the axe, every cluck of chickens, every tilt of her head toward the sky was a note in the symphony of their existence. By late morning, the children tumbled into the yard, laughter spilling like sunlight over dust and grass. They carried small bundles of firewood, tiny hands grasping familiar tools, faces flushed with effort and joy. Crispen crouched, letting one child climb onto his back, while Avaline laughed at their antics, heart full and steady. Work and play entwined, echoing through the cabin and fields. Every nail driven into a fence post, every furrowed line in the garden, every repaired board in the barn carried the imprint of a life built deliberately, patiently, lovingly. The seasons moved as they always do, with crisp winters, blooming springs, and blazing summers. Each day stitched into the next, a fabric of routine, care, and shared dreams. Avaline's hands grew skilled at planting and mending, at coaxing life from stubborn soil. Crispen became the storyteller of the prairie, recounting old adventures, transforming hardships into laughter, teaching their children not just to endure but to live with courage and kindness. Their home thrummed with life, every corner vibrant with memory, with laughter, with small acts of love. Years later, Avaline and Crispen sat on the same porch where he had first stepped from his horse, hands clasped tightly, watching the prairie stretch into the distance, gold and soft in the fading light. Their children had grown, carrying pieces of the land and the lessons of home into the world. The wind moved gently, as if carrying the story of a lonely girl and the wandering man who chose to stay. "Do you remember the first time you came here?" she asked, voice low and reflective. Crispen's grin was slow and certain. "I remember every step, every word, every look." "And you stayed," she said, leaning against him. "I did," he replied simply, "and I would do it all over again." They watched as the sun dipped, turning the prairie to fire and shadow, knowing that the life they had chosen, full, real, unwavering, was their own and theirs alone. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the echo of their love, a story born from loneliness and longing, hardened by choice and tenderness, and finally made whole. The first time Avaline Somerville met Crispen Bywater, neither of them could have known how fiercely and completely their lives would intertwine. But now, as the prairie stretched infinite and golden before them, as laughter and life poured from the cabin into the evening, their story was as enduring as the land itself. The shy woman and the bold companion had found each other, chosen each other, and in doing so, had built something that would last. Season to season, year to year, wind to wind, heart to heart, they remained together, standing side by side, facing every day with courage, love, and quiet joy. The dust of the past had settled, and what remained was nothing short of epic. A life, a love, a home, and the wild, enduring heart of the frontier itself.